Greetings to all. My name is Joanna Cohn, and I'm the director of the Institute for Global Tobacco Control at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Becky Freeman as today's speaker for our Innovations in Tobacco Control lecture series. Now, Becky Freeman started her work in tobacco control in a government role, helping to develop and implement a provincial strategy for tobacco control in Canada. She completed a master's degree in health promotion and took on the role of director of the Action on Smoking and Health in New Zealand. Then she completed her PhD at the University of Sydney in Australia, working with one of the legendary researcher advocates, Simon Chapman. Her doctoral dissertation addressed online media in relation to tobacco control. Now, Becky Freeman is an associate professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Sydney. Her program of research focuses on countering the commercial determinants of health. She studies how industries manipulate policy processes and how they use digital and social media to not only promote their products, but also to influence public and political attitudes toward public health regulation. Because of her expertise in researching digital platforms, Dr. Freeman has been invited by the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to prepare technical reports on how to monitor and regulate tobacco industry advertising. She has chaired the World Health Organization Expert Advisory Group on cross-border tobacco advertising and promotion. She has served as an expert consultant to the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. She was an expert member of the Australian National Health and Medical Research Council Electronic Cigarettes Working Committee, and she is an expert advisor to the New South Wales Ministry of Health on tobacco policy. Dr. Freeman has published extensively on strategies that tobacco companies use to promote their products, including online and through social media. And so I am very pleased that she has agreed to talk with us today about global tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. Thanks so much, Becky, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Joanna. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm coming from Sydney, Australia. It is 10:30 p.m. on 25th of April, so on a Tuesday night, and it's actually Anzac Day here in Australia as well. So extend my respect out to any servicemen and women who are with us today. I'm really excited to present to you. This is a topic I'm particularly passionate about, so I will do my best to keep to my 40 minutes, but I could probably go on for days and days, but I won't. I'm just going to share my screen now. All right. So I'm going to talk to you today about the global tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship regulation. What's old, what's new, and where to next. We're going to try and cover off lots of different examples and, give you some sort of views from what's happening here in Australia, what's happening in some countries that have less regulation, and what's happening in a global perspective. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the tradition of custodianship and law of the country on which the University of Sydney campuses stand, and pay respects to those who have cared and continue to care for country. And I extend my respect to any First Nations elders who are present on the call today. Now, before I get started with the meat of my presentation, I just want to show you a fun video. Here we go.
They sure work hard, don't they, Barney?
Yeah? I hate to see them work so hard.
Yeah, me too. Let's go around back where we can't see them.
Gee, we ought to do something, Fred.
Okay? How's about taking a nap?
Hey, I got a better idea. Let's take a Winston break.
That's it! Winston is the one filter cigarette that delivers flavor 20 times a pack. Winston's got that filter blend.
Yeah, Fred. Filter blend makes the big taste difference, and only Winston has it up front where it counts. Here, ahead of the pure white filter, Winston packs rich tobaccos specially selected and specially processed for good flavor in filter smoking.
Yeah, Barney, Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should.
The Flintstones has been brought to you by Winston, America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette.
Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should.
Okay, so that was the heyday of tobacco industry advertising, back in the 50s and 60s, before we even, knew that cigarettes really were all that bad for you. And you could essentially advertise cigarettes during, a family television viewing, during an animated cartoon. And, thankfully, those days are behind us. But as we go through the presentation, it's kind of reminiscent of the back in the days of early television and promotion of tobacco products. We maybe haven't come as far as we think. But I will just say that it's the image of Wilma at the end there lighting up that it just gets me every time. It's incredible. Look, we've known how impactful tobacco advertising is for quite a long time now. This study from 1991, so ancient history now, was matching up logos of popular fast-moving consumer goods and their images of their sort of logos with the product, and asked 3-year-old children to match, which logo or image goes with which product. And 30% of 3-year-olds could correctly match Joe Camel to a picture of a cigarette. And by the time those children were 6 years old, it was over 90%. So this sort of tobacco imagery, advertising, the logos, the brands, what goes along with it, really infiltrated pop culture. This was not something that only adults were exposed to, or young adults or teenagers, young children. If you're really interested in these sort of old school ads or even the new ads, I would just recommend this website to you called Trinkets and Trash. And it's really great. It collects examples of tobacco advertising, vaping product advertising, smokeless tobacco from all over the world. And it's a really good database. So for anyone's ever presenting, particularly I find, teenagers and things really love seeing these ads and taking them apart for media literacy. So just recommend that site to you as a really excellent resource for your own presentations. So what is tobacco advertising? Let's make sure we're all starting off from the same definition here. So the WHO FCTC, or the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, defines tobacco advertising as any form of commercial communication, recommendation, or action with the aim, effect, or likely effect of promoting a tobacco product or tobacco use either directly or indirectly. So that's a really nice broad definition. That's an intentional. And it requires that each country shall undertake a comprehensive ban on all tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship. I think it's important to note here the word comprehensive ban. It doesn't say, regulate advertising so that it doesn't appeal to children or protect children from advertising. Again, this is very intentional, showing that it's not possible to sort of, magically allow advertising of tobacco products and only have adult smokers see it or something like this. We need to, tobacco advertising is a key driver of smoking uptake, and it needs to be banned. And just to situate advertising in the sort of more theoretical model of the commercial determinants of health, you can see here you've got the drivers. So these are, what's driving corporations, that they want to increase demand for growth, internationalize their production and their selling. And the channels they do that through, marketing is a key channel. And of course, marketing, supply chain, lobbying, their corporate sponsored citizenship, these are all intertwined. And it's increasingly difficult to separate out, an ad for a tobacco product from a corporate communication saying how great British American tobacco is and that they, equally employ women, or that they're, bragging about their, advanced COVID-19 policies or whatever it is. So that corporate image, that corporate citizenship, using that as a marketing tool, it all sort of melds together. So tobacco companies have always defended their promotions by claiming that advertising serves only to encourage adult smokers, so people who have somehow independently made a decision to smoke, to switch or to try new brands. So that's what they say. They say, oh, the only reason we have to advertise is because adult smokers need to know about these new brands that are available to them. But new smokers, and they're primarily adolescents, enter the cigarette market every day. And increasingly, obviously, we incorporate the vaping market in that as well. And numerous academic reviews have identified that tobacco advertising is a key influence on youth to initiate smoking. And the 2012 US Surgeon General's report, for example, is one of these key reports. It highlights the influential nature of industry advertising, highlights the causal relationship between advertising and promotional efforts of tobacco companies and the initiation and progression of tobacco use among young people, and the causal relationship between depictions of smoking in movies and the initiation of smoking among young people. So we have really good definitive evidence here. This is not something that, is really up for disagreement. The industry advertises an awful lot. Young people who are exposed to that advertising are much more likely to take up smoking and are also much more likely to hold positive attitudes towards the industry itself. What about another source of evidence? I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the internal industry documents. These were documents that were released as a result of when the tobacco industry was essentially sued. They were required to disclose all their internal documents relating to health and advertising as well. And these internal documents are all available. You can get them on the Legacy website. You can look through them. There's some real key ones in this collection of industry documents that really lay out in very plain language just how important advertising was and how important young smokers were. For example, this particular document here. So remember, this comes from the tobacco industry's own files. Younger adult smokers are the only source of replacement smokers. Repeated government studies have shown that less than 1/3 of smokers start after age 18. Only 5% of smokers start after age 24. Thus, today's younger adult smoking behavior will largely determine the trend of industry volume over the next several decades. Says it pretty plainly there, doesn't it? We're not talking about switching brands among adults who have already decided to smoke. And it's also important to realize that the tobacco industry actually uses the term young adult to describe this youth market. And this is sort of one of the smoking gun documents here that reveals what this code is. So it's written in quite legalese, but it's worth reading. From time to time, when describing market categories and target audiences, we use references such as young smoker, young market, youth market, etc. These terms do not accurately describe what we're talking about. In the future, when describing the low age end of the cigarette business, please use the term young adult smoker or young adult smoking market. Please advise all members of your department that these terms should be used in all written materials in the future. And the writing's on the wall there, right? Recognition from lawyers advising this tobacco company that, look, we're going to get into some serious trouble here if any of these documents ever get leaked, that we were marketing to young people when we were saying publicly that we weren't. All right, let's switch now to the meat of the presentation and let's walk through some examples of what's actually happening in terms of advertising and promotion now, what's going on in not the world of the 1950s and 60s, but what's happening today. And the reason we need to do this is because reducing youth and adolescent exposure to positive and glamorized depictions of tobacco use embedded in entertainment media is essential to successful tobacco use prevention. And this is one of the primary sources now of tobacco promotional elements and imagery, in addition to their actual paid advertising. So commercial communication, you'll remember from my opening slides how the WHO FCTC definition talks about commercial communication. This is a really important distinction. We're not talking about, let's say I, for example, decide I just really love smoking and I think smoking is great. And I get onto my own Facebook page and I've not been given any free product. I don't work for Philip Morris International. I haven't been given a contract or anything like this. And I just talk about how much I love smoking and say I take a picture of myself with, the Marlboro brand. That's not a commercial communication. That's a personal communication. Just like if I were to stand on a street corner and talk about how much I love Marlboro, I would not be advertising. I would just be talking about something myself. But it's the commercial aspect of this. And so the depiction of tobacco in entertainment media, such as films, theater, and games, is a form of tobacco advertising and promotion, because that is a commercial communication, right? Video games aren't given away for free, or if they are, they have embedded advertising. Same with, movies as a mass business. And so young people remain exposed to pro-tobacco imagery in immersive ways through the media they consume. And increasingly, as media consumption patterns change, due to increased availability and affordability of the internet-enabled devices, especially smartphones, this content is likely to be viewed online or through a streaming service. And this is almost universally true. I mean, even the, low and middle income countries, high income countries, isolated countries, this is, is a truism. So let's look across some media types now. We're going to start with film and go through television, social media, computer games, and smartphone applications. Starting with films. Some of you are probably quite familiar with this website already, called Smoke Free Media, which is put together by UCSF. I highly recommend it to you. It's a fantastic resource. Again, it outlines, the history of promotion of tobacco products in films, but then, what's happening in present day. It has a really excellent database of, all the current movies, if they have smoking in them, if that film is rated for a particular audience. But it goes beyond just movies and extends to, streaming services, particularly with a nice focus on Netflix, and links to some really excellent reports. So again, highly recommend this as additional reading and resources to you. Television. So reality television shows are exceptionally popular with children and young adults. Now, I'm sure everyone on this call only watches very highbrow programming on, PBS or, listens to NPR. But believe it or not, reality programs are very popular and have a huge audience. And look, I'll admit, I enjoy a couple of reality shows myself. My son and I are currently really into Lego Masters, for example. I don't know if you have that where you're calling from, but these are really popular programs, and they're cheap to make. And so they're made everywhere. So, a UK version, the UK reality show Love Island, for example, had exceptionally high levels of smoking depiction. So tobacco imagery appeared in over 200 intervals and was identifiable. There were actually identifiable brands in these images. The 21 episodes that smoking appeared in had an estimated 559 million gross tobacco impressions. So an impression is how many eyeballs sort of saw that use of tobacco, because so many people watch these programs and there were so many tobacco images. That's a lot of impressions of tobacco use. And this includes children under age 16. And, like I said, the actual branding. So not just, a generic cigarette on screen. And surprisingly, 4 million children under the age of 16 actually watch these programs. So again, this idea that there is, reality show content that would only appeal to adults, we don't need to worry about it, I think is a real fiction. And again, this is not just true in the UK. A similar study in Brazil found, that reality programs, again, had high depictions of tobacco use. And I'm sure if you can think into your own country, I think there's, likely to be people calling in from all over. These programs, particularly ones that involve a lot of drama or relationships, they're often fueled with alcohol, and smoking makes their way in, and increasingly vaping as well. And so here we go with typical contestant smoking on one of these reality TV shows. So streaming television programs, a really seminal study that was done by the Truth Initiative, looking at Netflix. Obviously, we all know who Netflix is, the global streaming service provider. I imagine a lot of us have Netflix subscriptions ourselves. And in the US, a study of a nationally sourced sample of youth and young adults identified the 14 most popular broadcast and cable TV shows in this age group and analyzed them for tobacco imagery. And this study found that 79% of the shows most popular with 15 to 24-year-olds depicted smoking prominently. And the 7 Netflix shows that were in the sample registered a total of 319 tobacco incidents compared to broadcast or cable television shows with only 139 such portrayals. So in this particular sample, at this time, it looked like Netflix really was, leading the pack here, you could say, on depicting tobacco use. So what was Netflix's response to the study? This study got a lot of international media coverage as well as American media coverage. It was, big news at the time. It particularly pointed out that the Stranger Things program had a huge amount of smoking in it. Netflix said all the right things, going forward, all new projects that we commission with ratings of TV 14 or below for series or PG 13 or below for films will be smoking and e-cigarette free, except for reasons of historical or factual accuracy. So that gives an awful lot of wiggle room. I mean, it makes them sound like they've taken the issue seriously, but then obviously leaves a door open for them to be basically doing whatever they want. For new projects with higher ratings, there'll be no smoking or e-cigarettes unless it's essential to the creative vision of the artist or because it's character defining, historically or culturally important. In addition, starting later this year, smoking information will be queued as part of our ratings on the Netflix service so our members can make more informed choices about what they watch. So sort of a follow-up to the study, the While You Were Streaming report that's just recently been released, found that 60% of young people's 15 favorite shows featured tobacco imagery. So this is a little better. Not really. These shows exposed roughly 25 million young people to tobacco depictions. Netflix, which was previously a top offender for tobacco depictions, had notable reductions. However, youth popular Stranger Things continues to include tobacco imagery despite 2019 pledge to remove depictions from youth-rated programming. But of course, they gave themselves a pretty clear out there. So I think, this case here really exposes how self-regulation, leaving it up to these platforms to make their own policies, do their own, saying, oh, don't worry, we've got this in hand. We'll make sure we do the right thing. It's maybe not leading to the public health outcomes that we would want. We'll talk about that more in a minute. So what about social media and audio-visual sharing platforms now? So we're going to take you through quite a sort of a mix of the types of promotions on these platforms, everything from paid ads, tobacco industry corporate accounts, political ads, social media influencers, and again, this idea of depictions and imagery that's happening in the content on these sites. Okay. But before we get to those examples, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what social media platforms, what are they doing? So I want you to think now, what is the goal of social media platforms? And I bet some of you thinking like, oh, connection and communication and, building, engagement. And those things all sound very lovely. But the goal is actually to get you on the site for as long as possible, as often as possible. And I want you to think about your own social media use now. I have to admit, I'm a bit of I do enjoy Instagram and Facebook still. And think about how many times you log on to those sites. Now, you either have to really enjoy it, right? Or have FOMO, have you fear of missing out, right? Otherwise, why would you keep logging on? And so how do they do this? Well, like I said, you need to enjoy it or you have fear you're going to miss out. So they've got to give you, that sort of little feeling like, oh, this is something that I get something out of. So for those of us that post, I'm sure not all of you do, but think about the last image you put up maybe on social media. Maybe it was a picture of you on vacation or a picture you've taken, you're out at a nice restaurant. And I want you to think about how long before when you posted that image, how long before you went back and checked to see if anyone had liked or commented on that image. Now, if we were all in a room, I would make people sort of progressively sit down and say, until someone admitted that they only waited 30 seconds. But, most people don't wait that long to, you post an image, you go back and you check and see. And when we see that someone's liked it, we get a little hit of joy, don't we? Like, oh, wow, someone liked it. So that's how they get us going back. They give us this little sort of feedback loop of, oh, people are enjoying the things I'm putting out there. I'm connecting with people. So why do they want you on the site as long as possible and as often as possible? And why do they want you to enjoy it or fear that you're missing out? Well, it's pretty simple, actually. So that you are exposed to as much advertising as possible. That's it. Because, unless some of you are paying for Twitter Blue, I don't think anyone here has ever paid to have a social media account, right? We don't pay to have a Facebook account or an Instagram account. And so that the revenue model there is that we have to be exposed to advertising, but it can't all be advertising. We would quickly not enjoy it, right? This enjoy it bit, or fear of missing out bit would, we'd be like, oh God, all I see is ads. I don't want to be on there anymore. Or if the ads weren't relevant to you. So they've got to have that enjoyment bit where you feel like people are looking at your content or you're seeing content from other people that you can interact with. So it's that fine balance, but they do need you to be exposed to advertising. That's the key. So I hope we're all on the same page now about what social media is and what's it for. And this is the only way that the sites make money. Okay, so what are some of the types of ads on these social media platforms? Direct paid ads on social media are perhaps the easiest and clearest form of tobacco advertising, promotion, and sponsorship, which I shorthanded to TAPS here, to monitor and enforce. Many, but certainly not all, popular social media channels and search engines as well have adopted policies that do not allow overt or direct promotion of tobacco through paid advertisements. So you're not going to get a big flashing, buy this cigarette. But I will say, even if you just go onto Google right now on your own device and you were to type in, say, cigarette or vaping product or whatever, part of those Google results would give you a little map and tell you where the nearest locations are that you can go and purchase those things. So even those sort of self-policies about, oh no, we don't allow paid advertisements of these things, absolutely not. It doesn't really stand up. Like I said, why is Google telling me immediately where I can go and purchase these things when I Google cigarette? Shouldn't the first thing it be telling me is, how do I quit smoking, or reasons not to smoke, not, oh, hey, this is where you can buy one if you're in need of one. Tobacco industry corporate accounts. So you just have to hop on your favorite social media platform of choice. This one's Instagram, and you'll see that the tobacco industry has accounts on these pages. So while they're technically supposedly prevented from having paid ads, they're not prevented from opening corporate accounts. And this is a Philip Morris one, the Unsmoke Your World, which we all know is a PR campaign for their IQOS product. And when you were to look at this, you might think that it is a legit quit smoking site. It's like, oh, it's got testimonials. We use testimonials in tobacco control all the time. It's got, facts. It's got some cute memes about cats and things like this. So really, it's that part of that, Philip Morris's attempt to rebrand itself as a company that no longer wants people to smoke, that has these harm reduction, products, is supposedly going smoke-free. So it's all part of that PR campaign. Mission Winnow is another really example. Again, does Philip Morris still sponsor their Formula One? Is Marlboro still involved? What is this Mission Winnow? So really muddying the definitions of, what is sponsorship, what is the relationship between Philip Morris and Formula One, what is Mission Winnow? It's not a tobacco brand, it's a concept. And again, these social media platforms allowing that promotion just to happen carte blanche across their channels. Philip Morris International obviously also has quite a popular Facebook page, over 1 million people supposedly following it, although quite a few of those might be tobacco control types like myself, who I guess are hate followers or who are following to see what it is that they're up to. We did a really just very short little paper on this. We looked at how Philip Morris International was particularly using Facebook to undermine Australian tobacco laws. So we just looked at what they had been posting over, a couple months period. And, if you have a look here, you can see one of the ads that Philip Morris was putting on Facebook about smoke-free alternatives are effectively banned in Australia, it's time to change the law. Now, I imagine a lot of you are going, wait a second, you just said that Facebook doesn't allow the tobacco industry to advertise. They just have these corporate sites. Yes, but there is a big exception. While they are not allowed to advertise their products, they are allowed to have what Facebook calls political advertising. And so these are political ads. And so Facebook makes this distinction that as long as the ads are, I guess, identifiable as a political ad, so they have to have something in the ad itself that says, this ad is brought to you by so-and-so, sponsored by, paid for by so-and-so. And they're not pushing a product, they're pushing a particular, I guess, lobbying point of view, then they are allowed to have these ads on Facebook. And to me, that's a pretty big loophole, particularly in a country like Australia, where we've taken a really strong stand against the mass marketing and sales of e-cigarettes and heated tobacco products. And these are political ads attempting to overturn these laws. Again, these are just more examples of the sorts of ads that Unsmoke was pushing in Australia through the, obviously Unsmoke is a Philip Morris brand. We currently have a campaign in Australia called Responsible Vaping Australia, RVA, and that is actually owned by British American Tobacco. And they are putting ads all over everywhere. I get them every time I open Facebook, I get another ad. Very similar message saying that Australia's vaping laws aren't working and that we need to have a consumer model for the product as opposed to the prescription model that we currently have. And again, you can, if you go into Facebook, into the ad library, it's actually really easy to do. You can look for which companies' campaigns are running ads, and you get quite good data about how much money is being spent, who they're being targeted at here. So you can see these ads were being targeted primarily at young women, what region these ads were shown in. So if any of you who are doing this sort of local work and want to monitor, it's really worth keeping an eye on the Facebook political ad library. They do have to keep the data in there supposedly for 3 years. I've noticed that there's sometimes it is incomplete or the ads don't quite match up with what I know is being promoted at the time. And this also includes Instagram ads because Meta, the parent company, owns both Facebook and Instagram. So just another useful tool and again, these are quite useful in terms of any local lobbying or tobacco control advocacy efforts that you might have underway. If local politicians are looking for examples, this can be something quite useful. Obviously, there's lots of associated websites with this particular type of social media campaigns as well. Philip Morris International's website, if you were to go there, you would think they were some sort of smoke-free future company, or the Unsmoke website. But I think it's important to stress, I don't think, your average 17-year-old is going to the Philip Morris website or to the Unsmoke website. They're encountering this kind of content on social media channels and, probably not following the Philip Morris Facebook page either. It's more the embedded content that I'm going to get to next that's of much higher concern and of a much broader reach. So influencers, I'm sure you all know what influencers are, but just in case, perhaps some of you are influencers on this call. Despite my best efforts, I've never been given anything free to push on social media myself. But I do follow some influencers, particularly in the sort of cooking space. One of my hobbies is cake decorating. So you get exposed to all this kind of stuff. But there are people who also influence for tobacco companies, believe it or not. Fantastic study here was led by Campaign for Tobacco-Free Kids, exposing how all the transnational tobacco companies were engaging in this effort. We're putting influencers, particularly on Instagram, and they were seeking out young people who had significant numbers of followers and paying them to post photos featuring Marlboro, Lucky Strike, and other brands. And they were trained on what cigarette brands to promote, when to post pictures for maximum exposure, how to take natural photos that don't look like stage advertisements. In Italy in particular, influencers were paid to promote Lucky Strike cigarettes, were instructed to make sure health warnings on the packs were not visible in photos posted online. So this is pretty appalling. This is, you know, direct advertising under the guise of, you know, trying to make it look like natural, organic content rather than the ads that it was. And you've got these social media platforms, you know, speaking out both sides of their mouth at that time, saying, oh no, we would never allow advertising, and then allowing it in the back door this way. Wasn't just, we've also got British American Tobacco Glow, their heated tobacco product, you can see here, and Vipe, which is now called Views. This is a influencer ad out of New Zealand. Anna Weir was, or is, still is, a chef, and you can see the Vipe product just on the table there. And there was a period of time in New Zealand where there was virtually no advertising regulations around electronic cigarettes. Their smoke-free law was challenged in court by Philip Morris and found not to apply to e-cigarettes. And then there was a period of time when there simply were no laws. And a PhD student of mine at University of Auckland, she has examined, you know, what do tobacco companies do when there are no regulations around e-cigarette vaping? And do they only target adults with cessation messages like they say that they would do? No, they don't. They do things like this: hire chef influencers to pair their product with a tasting menu. You know, here you thought that, you know, wine and food went together. Well, so do vaping products. And now this depictions imagery. So let's just refresh what I mean by that. That's when you're sort of looking at entertainment content. So commercial entertainment content, you know, not just, you know, me talking about how much I love smoking, or a friend talking about how much she loves vaping and she hasn't been paid from it, but actual, like, you know, films or music videos that have, you know, that are commercial pieces of art that have smoking depictions in them, and increasingly vaping as well. So a UK study looking at the 110 most popular songs in the UK music charts found that tobacco appeared in, you know, 22% of all videos, e-cigarettes in 2%, tobacco branding in 4%, and e-cigarette branding in 1%. Now, this is a bit of an older study now. And I know there's always efforts being made to update this, particularly in light of all the different disposable e-cigarette brands that have come on the market. Computer games and smartphone apps. Again, a UK study found that actual tobacco use occurred in 32 intervals, implied use in 27 intervals, and paraphernalia in 53 intervals. So this is looking at a sample of video games. Pro-smoking smartphone apps found images of cigarette brands and images that resembled existing brands, and pro-smoking apps included a cartoon game and an opportunity to simulate the smoking experience with high-quality free apps. And that study was done by a PhD student of mine. I think what's interesting is, unlike smoke-free movies and social media, where we've gotten sort of a lot of press coverage and parental concern about the depiction of smoking in these platforms, and, you know, political concern as well, video games just doesn't seem to have that same element. And I think it's mostly due because parents are more focused on, and advocacy groups that are involved in the video game industry are more concerned about the levels of violence and sexual content in these video games. So tobacco use just really hasn't got the same kind of traction, which is interesting. Sort of a unifying theme across all of these sort of platforms, be it, you know, everything from Twitter to Facebook, Instagram, is one of the key areas of content is on this corporate social responsibility. And here's an example from International Women's Day from a few years ago. While others look for role models, our bold BA2 women create their own, and #BeBoldForChange, which was the hashtag being used for International Women's Day that year. And so again, this is a way of advertising that you're a changed company, you're a different company. You're not the same company that was advertising on Flintstones 20 years ago, showing, I wish it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago. We're these new modern companies, and we're leading the way, and we have new modern products, and we have new modern ways of working, and we're using these new media platforms, right? It's all sort of rolled up in together. And, you've got corporate social responsibility messaging around environmental issues as well. Here we go. Introducing the first global carbon neutral vape brand. This comes from British American Tobacco for their Views product. Vape together, care together. I think this is a tricky space because there is some, I think, I guess interest would be the word, some interest in perhaps pursuing the environmental impacts of, in particular, vaping products and cigarette butts, right? Saying, oh, no, if we can't sort of get an angle in on the public health issues, the fact that these products kill people and give them cancer, people might be really concerned about the environmental impacts of these products, which I totally get. I think, obviously, particularly young people are increasingly concerned about environmental issues. It gets a lot of media coverage. It's high profile. It's a new way in. But the industries can sense that as well and want to take advantage of that. And so using these environmental messages against us, it's something I just think we need to be really careful about. And just to, emphasize, this is an example out of Indonesia. Another one of my fabulous PhD students, Ayu, who did a study looking at, and now Indonesia, if there's anyone from Indonesia on the call today, will be able to speak to this, is the fact that it's essentially as a tobacco industry paradise. There are very little laws. You can do whatever you like. And it's not that social media and all these things don't get used there because they're second best, even though you can advertise on television still in Indonesia. They've just combined all these things. So they're using social media in combination with, pack design competitions and outdoor concert series and Instagram. And so I hate people to think, oh, social media, it's this niche thing, or it doesn't really matter. It's, we've cut off billboards and we've cut off, sponsoring concerts, these things are a bit, no, like this is all part of the same package. And they're just as valuable in countries that still allow those more obvious forms of marketing. I think it's important to touch on this idea about this reinventing sponsorship. Some of you may have seen, some of you probably are fans of Drive to Survive, that airs on Netflix, really reinvigorated people being interested in F1. This is a sport that supposedly to the tobacco industry was no longer going to be allowed to splash their brands all over the car. But lo and behold, the BAT has a global partnership with McLaren Racing. You've got Velo splashed all over the car now. Even in countries like Australia, we have a F1 event here. The Melbourne F1 race, even though technically the Velo brand is not allowed to be on the car in Australia, it doesn't really matter because all the associated social media and the YouTube content and the interviews that the racers do, they've got all these brands all over them anyway. And then you watch the Drive to Survive and the sheer volume of tobacco industry advertisements and promotions that are being done because of that watching. You've got one or two races in the F1 circuit that don't allow the brand on the car. It's just it's clearly not working. We need to take more of a global perspective on how this is managed. And just to say really quickly, I don't want to talk about too much COVID stuff because I think people would rather we not have to talk about that too often at the moment. But I will say, nothing is sacred to this industry. They used COVID-19 for their own corporate gain as well, putting together merch. You can see here the BAT Glow heated tobacco product face mask here, and still advertising. They were challenging. South Africa, for example, wanted to declare that that tobacco was not an essential good. Took them to court over that. Eventually that didn't go ahead. So just to picture this, and even in times where you would think perhaps they might behave themselves, certainly they did not. And I'm conscious of the time now, so I'm just going to refer you to a couple of papers now rather than get into too much more stuff. But just to talk how in addition to all this social media stuff, there's also a lot of business to business marketing that happens. So we did a study led by Christina Watts a PhD student of mine where we interviewed former tobacco industry employees and asked them, we recruited them through LinkedIn and just asked them, what kind of marketing are you doing in a place like Australia where we've pretty much universally banned all types of marketing? And they talked about the importance of having relationships with retailers and relationships with hospitality in particular, and giving us examples of how they bought in John Farman. He's a big Australian singer, probably not too popular in the other parts of the world, but huge, bringing him in for parties, acknowledging that they couldn't offer people cigarettes, but they could put them out for free, that it's really important, in particular these spaces where young adults go, that tobacco is still normalized. Training retailers about how to talk about products, because in Australia, our cigarettes are under the counter, they're in plain packages, but you can still talk about the product, you can recommend one product over another. Rebates and discounts. This is huge in the retail sector. It's absolutely the number one thing that these companies are doing. And so this whole business side is you've got the external facing things they're doing on social media and the imagery that we're seeing in entertainment media. But then you've got this whole other sort of behind the scenes side, which is with the retailers themselves. I'm just going to skip now down to the end here and just talk about what we need. And I think obviously we require really strong regulation of corporate behavior. Relying on the social media platforms themselves to regulate themselves, or relying on the tobacco industry to regulate itself, it's just a fool's mission. That's absolutely going to make no difference. So self and public health education or policy making partnerships, all these sort of loose around the edges approaches are really going to have a minimal impact. Voluntary regulations lack meaningful enforcement. Education is drowned out by this omnipresent marketing. We just don't have the same kind of resources that the industry does to be able to drown them out of social media platforms. And policymaking partnerships often result in regulations that really heavy flavor the industry rather than health. And so really updating tobacco advertising laws, they're out of step and out of date. Ensuring that we start to address the marketing that's aimed at 18 to 24-year-olds, in particular, this relationship with hospitality sector, with bars and pubs and clubs. Why are we still allowing the tobacco industry to sell in these locations? Obviously, supply is the very beginning of the marketing chain, as I showed you in the commercial determinants of health model. And I think obviously the biggest thing we need to do is cooperate on a global scale through the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. We need to really support that global policy instrument and ensure that all countries are working together to sort of end tobacco advertising, particularly online. And I will leave it there so that we actually have a little bit of time for questions. Sorry, Joanna, for going over. I will stop there.
That's fantastic, Becky. Thank you so much. What a wonderful tour of covering many decades, many platforms for advertising and promotion and sponsorship too. We have a number of questions, and you
Sure.
did touch on this at the end, but I think a few participants are interested in hearing a little bit more from you about what can we do about all this,
Yes,
particularly
absolutely.
like the cross-border
Mhm.
issues.
Yeah.
Like, are there precedents for
Mhm.
regulating this kind of thing? How do we do it? It feels like
Too big.
almost impossible, but love to hear from you
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, no, I actually don't think it is impossible. I think that it's to, in particular, social media companies' advantage to make us think it's impossible. I think the Facebookers of the world, they've been pulled up in, Senate hearings. They've been pulled up in front of Congress. They've had, and they keep saying how, you don't understand how online works and it's too big, but we're good guys, we can take care of it. And they just haven't proven to be that. And you would think that, a few years ago, I'm sure a lot of you will remember the horrible terrorist attack that happened in New Zealand in Christchurch. And that was broadcast live on Facebook, those videos. And I thought, aha, this is the moment. This is the moment where regulators are going to be like, no more. If Facebook is going to allow that to happen and not take responsibility for broadcasting such, horrifying acts. This is where they're going to get regulated. And they didn't. My mind was just blown by that. And sorry, I am getting to an optimistic point of view. Don't worry. In some ways, I think because we have such history in tobacco control of regulating advertising, we haven't just, worked with newspapers to get advertising out of newspapers, or worked with television to say, oh, how can we prevent tobacco on TV? We've been like, no, firm regulation. Maybe tobacco is a doorway in. Maybe no other area has been able to do this, but maybe we can. We have the Framework Convention. We have cross-border has been on the Conference of the Parties discussion for years now. We are getting to updating of those guidelines, hopefully at the next COP that will be presented. And there's clearly a desire to cooperate. And we can use these same social media tools to our advantage. It's really hard to hide now. Like, you can't secretly market online. Someone will find out. So I think that's kind of something that we can use to our advantage, that we can do, and that we will be able to hold these companies to account. We just have to keep pushing.
Great, thanks so much for that. And then I guess on a related note, someone had a question about just sort of, so we talked about cross-border issues, but if we focus in on a country,
Sure.
have you seen any particularly effective campaigns to counter tobacco advertising, promotion, sponsorship, things that have worked, best practices?
Sure. Look, obviously, when we're talking tobacco control, we're talking a comprehensive approach. Advertising bans are just one pillar of a tobacco comprehensive approach, right? You got to have tax increases, you've got to have pictorial health warnings, you've got to have quit smoking supports, you've got to have smoking bans. And then the other key pillar of that is mass media communication campaigns. 100%. That is, it's an evidence-based way of doing things. It's not just people, oh, I think this would make for a nice campaign, and we put it out there. And Australia's Every Cigarette is Doing You Damage campaigns have proven to drive quit rates. We know the CDC tips campaigns, fantastic evidence that those increase people quitting as well. Thing is, though, those ads always have to be on air. And by on air, I mean on social media platforms. They're not we ran a campaign last year and then now we don't have a campaign. When those campaigns aren't on air, they can't do anything. There's not sort of like we aired that 2 years ago and we're still reaping the benefits of that. They have to keep being aired. So you have to keep funding them. You have to keep budgeting them. You have to keep coming up with new cut through messages. So I think people always say, what's the secret? What's the content? It's actually, you need to have the ads on the air. You need to fund them, and you need to keep them going.
Great, thanks so much. And then one of the early questions we got was some of you talked about streaming services, and I think this has come up in tobacco control for a long time, but the question is about if the actors are using herbal and not tobacco, or some not nicotine. What does that how do we deal with that? And I mean, obviously there's the social norm issue. No one's going to know what's in the product, but this is an issue with water pipe or hookah and other smoke-free laws and all kinds of things. But have you had to address that?
Yeah, I think, the biggest issue here, I think, getting hung up on those sorts of details can really serve as a distraction as well. And to me, it's really laid out quite clearly. It's a commercial communication. It's subject, according to the laws definition we have all accepted, that the promotion of tobacco products under commercial communication, it's something that we do not accept. And, the Smoke-Free Movies media website lays it out really clearly of, declare that there was no incentive received from the industry, make sure there's warnings on there, et cetera, et cetera. They've laid out their policy really clearly. And we face this issue in other aspects of tobacco control that we always think we're talking about cigarettes, and we're not. We're talking about hookah. We're talking about smokeless. We're talking increasingly about vaping products as well. So being all inclusive. And Look, I don't think anyone is out here saying everything should be banned. We can't ever see another cigarette on screen or ever have a pipe on screen. It's just this blatant glamorization of the products when they're targeted at young people and there's no associated health messages at all. That's what we're talking about.
Great. And maybe one last question that we'll try and stick
Sure.
with, and I'll have to ask you for, unfortunately, a quick answer. But
Oh, sorry. Yes.
the industry's transformation campaigns and unsmoke, smoke free. I mean, on one hand, it's brilliant. Um, you probably predicted this sort of thing way back. How do you see this playing out, and what should our role be in tobacco control?
Ah, well, I mean, like you say, in some ways you have to tip your hat to them. It's like, yep, we paved the road for you to be able to do this, and you took it and off you went. Don't get sucked in by it, I guess, is the biggest issue. It's advertising promotion. It's exactly what they've always been doing. It is Flintstones promoting an ad again. It is not new. It is not transformed. I don't think there's many people in tobacco control who really believe that. And we just need to make that crystal clear, have our key messages ready, ensure that regulators understand that perfectly, and that the tobacco industry isn't allowed to interfere in tobacco control policy. Article 5.3 and Article 13 have got to work together really closely.
Great. Thanks for a quick answer for that. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I know there are a few more questions that we didn't get to, but we'll save them and send them along to Dr. Freeman. But
Oh
again,
yeah, and please reach out to me on Twitter or email me. I'm always happy to hear from people. No problem.
great. Well, thank you so much for a wonderful global perspective on this important topic and what we can do about it. Thank you so much.